Week 1 is in the books, and what a week it was. We had everything: upsets, overtime, a tie game, surprises, and some serious fantasy disappointments as well. But we are on to week 2. This is the FanDuel Waiver Wire Q&A. We'll be here every Tuesday at 2:30 to answer your waiver wire questions. I'm Simon, here with JJ Zachariason, owner of Late Round Fantasy Football. JJ, how was that week 1 for you?
It was all right, actually. I feel like some people had it worse than I did. That'll happen. People will, I'll have bad weeks here and there, but it was okay to me overall. I've had better, I've had worse. Fortunately I was not, in the monsoon in Chicago, like many fans were and teams, and, the two teams were, but it was an okay start to the season.
With the amount of Darnell Mooney I had on my teams, I felt like I was in that monsoon. I felt every single drop of rain from that, just watching Darnell Mooney do nothing out there on the field. But overall, week 1 was crazy. There were games that I went pretty bad in my pick'em this week. So a lot of results that I didn't expect. I'm already seeing one question in here, JJ, that we can go ahead and hit from Brett Francois. While we're waiting for some waiver wire questions right there, wants to know, how is this rotation in a 10-team PPR for week 2? CeeDee Lamb, Deontay Johnson, and Marquise Brown. So some disappointing players. Dak Prescott going down injured. CeeDee Lamb now going to be playing with Cooper Rush most likely. Deontay Johnson in a Steelers offense that looked a little bit weird this week. And then Marquise Brown's still going to be the wide receiver 1 in that offense. Are you comfortable with this rotation at wide receiver?
I'm not feeling amazing about CeeDee Lamb, obviously, with the Dak Prescott injury. I'm looking at my rest of season rankings. I wanted to pull that up. I now have CeeDee Lamb at overall, like as a basically a wide receiver 2 now. Deontay Johnson, not loving the Steelers offense, but Deontay ended up seeing a 30% plus target share in that offense, which is really good to see. So if the Steelers offense starts moving a little bit better, then Deontay Johnson will benefit in some way. And then Hollywood, I think it was just a bad game for Arizona in general. His peripherals weren't great. You would expect a higher target share. I think he finished with like a 17% share. So I think it's okay enough. CeeDee Lamb is the one where there's just a lot up in the air about how this will kind of go and the direction that this will go. I will be honest, ranking him rest of season was not easy. I didn't feel comfortable really I don't know where to put him. I just think that there's a lot of ways that this could go. I think that the wide receivers, though, could be worse. I expect Marquise Brown to definitely bounce back. Deontay, if the Steelers get a little bit better, he'll be all right. This is an okay enough rotation.
Yeah, I'm with you. And one thing I'm never saying again, I said it too many times this offseason, who the hell else are they going to throw the ball to? Well, the answer is there's plenty of people on every NFL team that can throw the ball to. Right. Marquise Brown, there's other options over there. Darnell Mooney, there's other options. Don't use that as a reason to draft someone in fantasy football. We have a question in here from Joey Wright. Wants to know, do you prioritize Curtis Samuel or Jahan Dotson on the waiver wire this week? Both Washington Commanders wide receivers who had decent outings.
Yeah, I like this question a lot. I think it's one that a lot of people are facing this week. I'm a big Jahan Dotson guy. I write a 15 transactions column through my newsletter every Tuesday, or goes out every Tuesday. I do my podcast on it too. And last week I had Jahan Dotson on there. So last week I was prioritizing Dotson over Curtis Samuel because Dotson is very good. 16th overall pick, really good production profile in college. You saw his athleticism and like he's like an acrobat out there. He really can high point the ball despite his size. So I like Jahan Dotson. And if you look at the snap share in this offense, it was very, very obvious that Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson are the 1-2 at wide receiver in this offense. It just so happens that Curtis Samuel found the matchups. He got some rush attempts as well. And the other thing to point out too, a lot of people are ready to like get rid of these like rookie wide receivers, not Jahan Dotson per se, but these rookie wide receivers maybe underperformed a little bit, didn't have amazing target shares in week 1. I get it. I understand that you want to get production on your team right away, but you drafted rookie wide receivers in redraft leagues for the second half of the season, because that's when these guys really tend to blow up and do really well. So I would prioritize Jahan Dotson over Curtis Samuel. I think both are decent ads this week, but I would go Dotson over Samuel right now.
I'm with you for the most part. I will say this comes down a little bit to roster construction for me. Like, let's say you had Keenan Allen go down and you need someone to start next week. I might pick up Curtis Samuel. I think he's a little bit safer to plug in and start. But if you're shooting for that upside, you're 100% right. An 88% snap percentage for Jahan Dotson on that team, only behind Terry McLaurin, and he was a rookie week 1. Like, if you want that upside, it's Jahan Dotson. But Curtis Samuel being involved in the rushing game, like you get a little bit of safety there as well. If you guys are watching this and you're enjoying it, you have questions for us, make sure you like this video and subscribe to FanDuel on YouTube. Hit that follow button on Twitch as well. And keep throwing your questions in here. JJ and I are going to be here for the next 25 or so minutes answering all your waiver wire questions. Kevin in here wanted to know, if I have a chance to pick up Taysom Hill for tight end, do I go for him and turf Ertz?
So I've seen a lot of people talking about Taysom Hill as that, and I understand it. You look at production, he was a top 5 tight end this past week. But at the end of the day, he played 16 snaps. I'll say it right now. I don't know if Taysom Hill is even the best tight end option on his own team after week 1. You had Juwan Johnson, ran a lot of routes, played a lot of snaps. He was the tight end 1 for their team, the traditional tight end 1 for their team. Taysom Hill is going to have these like random upside games. It'll occur, and maybe that's good enough for you at the tight end position. But I'm just concerned that he's not going to be very reliable week in and week out. He had 5 total touches in that game. I mean, that's not something that you can reliably bank on week in and week out. I know some people might disagree, and some people might say, it's Taysom Hill and he's very efficient, which he is when he gets the ball in his hands. But if you're going to get 4 rush attempts and 1 reception from Taysom Hill every week, chances are you're not going to have a tight end 1 in fantasy football. So to me, at least from like a PPR standpoint. So for me, I would not be doing that. I still think Zach Ertz is like a top 10 tight end from here on out too.
If he doesn't score that touchdown, I don't think we're even having this conversation,
right? Exactly.
No, 100%. I'm with you on that one right there. Alex in here wants to know, who are you guys targeting in Scott Fishbowl? This is not a trick question. So maybe to make this more broad, in deeper leagues, which Scott Fishbowl is a very deep league, are there any like deep sleepers on the waiver wire, someone that maybe isn't owned in a 2022 round draft that you'd be targeting this week?
Yeah, I think there's 2 that popped in my mind. I was just talking about this in my podcast that's going to drop tomorrow. But first off, I think Christian Kirk had a really, really underrated week 1 just in general. And I was talking about that on the show. But then I'm like, well, Zay Jones also had a very, very underrated week 1. He didn't have as good of production as Christian Kirk did. But Zay Jones actually had better expected fantasy points total than Christian Kirk had. So he was getting targets in the right areas of the field. He just didn't fully convert the way that Christian Kirk did. So I think that Zay Jones is someone to at least pay some attention to. And then, I'm sure we're going to get some Jeff Wilson questions eventually. I do think that Jeff Wilson is the priority pickup in that backfield, in that San Francisco backfield with Elijah Mitchell now going to be out for a couple months. But would it shock anyone if Kyle Shanahan decides to roll with any of whether it's Jordan Mason or whether it's a Tyrion Davis-Price, who is inactive? And I know that he was inactive over Mason, or with Mason over him. But Mason plays special teams and Tyrion Davis-Price does not do that. So I think that what we could end up seeing is the 3 running backs active on game day for San Francisco being Jeff Wilson, Tyrion Davis-Price, and Jordan Mason. And then TDP just being maybe they rely on him more as an early down back. I think that's in the range of outcomes here, right? So I wouldn't mind throwing very, very cheap darts at those 2 other San Francisco running backs as opposed to Jeff Wilson. Obviously, go after Jeff Wilson, that's fine. But we've seen some crazy stuff go on with Kyle Shanahan since he got to San Francisco because of injuries, etc. But since he got to San Francisco, he's had a different lead rusher every single year he's been head coach there. It's insane. I mean, this is just the way that he does. We've seen it throughout his entire coaching career. We saw it with Alfred Morris. We've seen this tree, Steve Slayton back in the day. I mean, there's been these random running backs come from Elijah Mitchell last year. These random like day 3 undrafted running backs do work in his offenses. And so I am even Devontae Freeman, I guess. So I'm definitely at least throwing some darts at those guys in deeper leagues.
No, and I see people saying like TDP wasn't even active this week. How are you going to consider him the backup? Well, these running backs play different roles in this offense. Yeah. Know what I mean? Yeah. Jordan Mason likely was there as a supplementary back, different skill set to Elijah Mitchell in week 1. TDP could have just been a redundancy there. And with Elijah Mitchell out, I don't think him not being active, being a healthy scratch means he's not the guy going into it. I agree with you. I love that pick. Following up on the Jeff Wilson stuff, Joseph in here wants to know, So he's in a league that has waiver priority, no fab in this league. If you have that number one waiver priority, is Jeff Wilson the move, knowing Elijah Mitchell is going to be out for at least 2 months?
I think I'm lower on Jeff Wilson than the consensus, because if you look at how Wilson's done when he's been the lead back, when he's been the starter, he's been really productive from a fantasy perspective. The issue that I have is that those splits don't have Trey Lance as quarterback and Deebo Samuel playing this role that he's been playing over the last year, half year within this offense. So, Deebo Samuel is going to take probably 7 to 9 carries a game. Yeah. Trey Lance close to the end zone. Not only is this team, not necessarily going to be as effective. Not only is he not going to necessarily see as much volume through the air, in which we want targets at the running back position, but Trey Lance can still work at the goal line too. So there's this dual threat of Deebo Samuel and Trey Lance now. So I'm a little bit low. And then the stuff we just talked about with, Kyle Shanahan's insanity in the way that he uses the running backs that he's had. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Wilson is not as good as what people think. I mean, think of it this way, Simon. I mean, we have Elijah Mitchell is drafted in redraft leagues as an RB2, right? And some would consider him just like a safe, high floor, low ceiling RB2 because of Deebo, because of Trey Lance, and because of the fact that he didn't catch a lot of passes out of the backfield. How can we expect Jeff Wilson to be better than that? I don't think that that's very logical to expect him to be a mid-range RB2 or an RB1. I think what's logical is that you're looking at an RB3 in fantasy. And there's nothing wrong with that, but spending the number one waiver priority on that, it's a relatively replaceable spot. Unless you're in a really deep league, I wouldn't do it. If you're in like a standard 10 or 12 team league, I don't think it's necessary to burn that priority. Obviously, it depends on what's on the waiver wire right now, but there will be, I think, generally we see this throughout the season, there will be better backups who have a clearer path to getting work in their offense than what we're seeing with Jeff Wilson right now. So look, I like Jeff Wilson fine. I think that he can be a rock solid RB3, maybe a low end RB2 to flex, but just in these situations, always place the backup running back and give it some context of how we viewed the starter before the starter went down. Because generally speaking, when we see these situations happen, backup running backs are backup running backs for a reason. They're not starting for a reason. So I think I'm a little bit lower than the consensus. Maybe I'm sounding crazy, but I think I'm a little bit lower than consensus on Jeff Wilson right now.
No, I'm with you, JJ. I like him as a pickup, but in a league where you have to spend your number one waiver priority, I don't think I'm willing to do that. You mentioned we've seen him as the lead back in this offense before. In 4 games last year without Elijah Mitchell, in only 2 of them did he score more than 14 PPR fantasy points. And now that's nothing to sneeze at. You're happy with 14 PPR fantasy points from your RB2 on any given week, but that was half the time, and that was without Trey Lance at quarterback. Yeah. That 14 points is probably going to be what you're happy with if you get him, but it's not going to be what you get every week while Elijah Mitchell is out. And then Scott in here following up, 49ers back, running backs, just leave it alone. It sounds like you'd be a little bit more willing to throw some money at those 2 cheaper guys, the Jordan Mason, TDP. Which one of those 2 do you prefer?
Probably. I'm hoping that we can get some report, but part of me wants to say TDP because I think he has more of that like replaceable Elijah Mitchell skill set. But I do think Mason, might be a more well-rounded, get some work through the air kind of player. So it depends on the format you're in. Maybe standard and half, I'd go TDP. Maybe in full, go Mason. And again, we're talking $1 for these guys. Like you don't need to go like this is a dart throw type play, but it's one of those strategic plays where if you're not as high on the player that everyone's going after in Jeff Wilson, which again, still throw some money at Jeff Wilson if you've got a free agent budget. But if you're not as high on that guy, then get the alternatives for very cheap. I mean, that's the direction to generally go, because in these moments, we think that we know a lot more than we actually do about these situations and about these teams. And so play into that variance, go against the grain a little bit, and sometimes you can hit.
Absolutely. Ronnie in here, Ronnie Hot Dog wants to know, would you drop Isaiah Pacheco for Jeff Wilson? So this is a player that people drafted hoping for that shot late in drafts, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire had a nice week himself. Isaiah Pacheco looked decent out there on the field too. Would you be willing to drop this rookie after 1 week to pick up Jeff Wilson?
I have him like in the same tier basically in my rest of season rankings for what it's worth. So I do think it's close. My thing is, if you need immediate production, you can do it. But if you're just adding a player like Jeff Wilson for long-term stashing or just to have someone that has upside on your bench, I would rather have Pacheco on my bench because I think that he presents more upside. So unless you need that immediate production, I would not do this. If you do need that immediate production, I think it's okay.
Would you be willing to drop Kadarius Toney? Ronnie says that's his only other option. Kadarius Toney played only 7 snaps in that Giants victory over the Titans this week, so completely uninvolved.
Yeah, very frustrating. I'm still holding Kadarius Toney where I have him. I think the upside, again, it's the same sort of like dilemma where Pacheco and Tony to me have much more upside than Jeff Wilson does if things break their way. And so if you're not using those players, or if you're not needing to use Jeff Wilson, I would probably just rather hold those guys, have the upside down the stretch. Because again, the other thing we have to think about with fantasy is we're weighing the latter weeks of the season. We should be a lot heavier than week 2, week 3, week 4, because those are the fantasy playoffs and those are that's what matters most, right? By the time the fantasy playoffs hit, Elijah Mitchell is probably going to be back, or he should be back, just given this timeline that they had given us. So, and other things are going to happen too within this offense. So I think that there's a lot more risk than with Wilson, longer term, whereas there's a lot of upside with a guy like Pacheco. Pacheco's a handcuff to CEH, but also might have standalone value later in the season as a rookie. We often see rookies, like I said earlier, not just at wide receiver, but at running back too. They perform a lot better during the second half of the year. He's in top 3-4 offense in the league. Then Kadarius Toney really had numbers last year as a rookie that only great rookies have hit historically. So I'm still leaning those two other guys just because, I think that there's just more upside.
Yeah, I'm with you. And I'm sitting here thinking something that we don't know has to be going on with Kadarius Toney, an undisclosed injury, something off the field, because 7 snaps is truly preposterous when you look at the rest of that wide receiver core.
Yeah.
Hopefully that gets figured out. Larry in here wants to know, would you drop Albert O for Logan Thomas or Gerald Everett?
Interesting question. So I actually have Gerald Everett 1 spot ahead of Albert O right now in my rest of season rankings, but they're in the same tier. So definitely not Logan Thomas. I think Logan Thomas is not part of this discussion, but Gerald Everett had the right peripherals. He had the right production in week 1. We generally see these late round tight ends associated with elite quarterbacks do well and really exceed expectation in fantasy. We saw it last year with Dalton Schultz and Dawson Knox. Saw it a few years ago with Austin Hooper when Matt Ryan was a top 5 quarterback by ADP in fantasy. So technically I have Everett 1 spot ahead. I worry about Albert O whenever Dolchich comes back, and maybe they are going to use him more than most rookie tight ends are used. So if you want to use that as a tiebreaker, maybe go for it. But if you want to just keep Albert O, because sometimes making the move and dropping a player and adding someone else is just more difficult from a psychological standpoint, because if Albert O then goes off, which he obviously can, because he's a monster and freak athlete, then that's going to just hurt you more, deep down. I would like to honestly platoon those 2 tight ends. I would love having Albert O and Gerald Everett on my roster, just kind of play by matchup and go week in and week out. But I guess technically I have Everett higher. I'd go Everett, but I don't think you necessarily need to drop Albert O for him.
I run all my decisions through that filter.
Yeah.
If I make this decision, which outcome am I going to be more pissed by?
Yeah, exactly.
Like if I leave this guy on my bench and he blows up, am I going to be more mad than if I put him in my lineup and he fails? And it causes some maybe some poor decisions, but also helps with my peace of mind on NFL Sundays. Keeps me a little bit calmer right there. I'm with you, JJ. I view Gerald Everett maybe as a little bit safer than Alberto in this high-powered offense, and I like pairing them. Shout out to our friend Coupe Fiasco. He's all about that yin and yang tight end strategy, and I think this fits in that role. Alberto's that kind of question mark. How involved is he going to be throughout the season, but with huge upside potential? Jared Everett a little bit safer. Never going to be the first or second target in that offense, but you can expect decent games from him just because of the nature of how that team works. Ian Henry wants to know, is Jeff Wilson a legit RB2 for the next couple of weeks? We talked about this a little bit already. It sounds like you think he's more of an RB3, right, JJ?
Yeah, I'd say RB3, and the reasons listed here. You got Lance stealing some goal line work. I'm not even necessarily worried about the rushes as much as I am the goal line work. And then Debo back there too. And then the other young running backs that are on that roster. So yeah, all of the above. I agree with this. I think he's probably the top priority this week, but I don't prioritize him the same way that others do.
No. Joseph in here, another Wilson question, but this one with a little bit more specifics about another player they would be starting, someone who disappointed this week with James Robinson more involved. Joseph wants to know, would you pick up and start Jeff Wilson over Travis Etienne this week?
Yeah, I mean, I got to see. So the Jags get the Colts and the 49ers get the Seahawks. I would not be surprised if I have Jeff Wilson over Etienne in my half PPR rankings. Etienne had kind of a disappointing week 1. He had opportunities to score. He had multiple opportunities to score and didn't. And if he did, I mean, I think the conversation of James Robinson versus Travis Etienne looks a lot different today than it does. But with that being said, Seattle's a great matchup for Jeff Wilson. I do think that he's still going to see a decent amount of work. So I've been saying all this stuff about Wilson moving forward as like an RB3. He'll probably be ranked as an RB2 next week.
Perfect. I think I'm still starting ETN. Something that was promising. It wasn't just that he got looks in this offense, but he was getting some high value looks as well.
Yeah,
he was one of only, what is it, 5 or 6 players that had 3 or more red zone targets. Jamar Chase obviously leading that category with 6, but Travis Etienne had 3 red zone targets in that game. And when he did touch the ball, he looked great out there. I think he just looked good. He passed the eye test. I'm going to go with Etienne. I think he gets it going. He was just a couple really close plays from being that superstar that we wanted him to be in this week 1. Dustin has a question for us. So outside of Gerald Everett, maybe, who we already talked about, is there a Chargers pass catcher we should be looking at if Keenan Allen misses more than just 1 game? Maybe besides Mike Williams, Palmer, or Everett. I think we can throw Palmer in there. He's probably on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues.
Yeah, I think Palmer is the guy that you want to go after. I mean, if you look at him and DeAndre Carter this past week, basically everyone on the Chargers saw 4 targets. Like if you were a Chargers player on offense, a skill player, you probably saw 4 targets this past week. But if you look at the snap share and the routes run and stuff, Palmer was very clearly the wide receiver 3 or 2 when Keenan Allen went down. In that offense, he's going to be the 2. He's the guy that you want to add. I don't think Carter is going to be anyone that is reliable enough. And then Eckler's probably going to see a little bit of a boost too in target share if they can have a back and forth, which we should probably expect. So I would prioritize Palmer off the wire of these guys. I think Everett's a great tight end add as well if you need the tight end, but I'm not looking really beyond that in most formats.
My first thought whenever Keenan Allen's going to miss time is I'm just a little bit more confident in that Mike Williams bounce back game.
Yeah,
I'm a little bit more confident there. It has to happen. He led the league, or not the league. He led the team in routes run and was on the field for the vast majority of the game. Just didn't go his way. And if Keenan Allen's not there, hopefully it does. I'm not going to say the phrase earlier that I said I wasn't going to say. So we'll leave that one off. Michael in here has a question for us. Wants to know, is it worth dropping Pickens or Rachaad White for either Rex, Samuel, or Robbie? So Rex Burkhead, Curtis Samuel, or Robbie Anderson. Is George Pickens worth dropping for any of those 4 guys?
I think this is another one of those situations where it just depends on if you need immediate production over the next 4 or 5 weeks, right? Like long term, Pickens could blow up the second half of the season. Long term, Rachaad White has more upside if something happens to Leonard Fournette, and maybe they just start to use him and ease him into that offense a little bit more and more. Whereas Rex Burkhead, I think the opposite is going to happen, where Burkhead should be added this week. I think that he's low key. If you need immediate production, we've been talking about Jeff Wilson, you're going to be able to get Rex Burkhead for half the price in terms of free agent budget. But in the short term, he's probably going to produce relatively similar as Jeff Wilson in PPR formats because the Texans are going to be in these negative game scripts. He saw 22% target share this past week. He had more rush attempts than Dameon Pierce did. But eventually you would assume that rationally Dameon Pierce ends up taking over that backfield a little bit more and more as the season goes on. So again, this is looking at, and this is the way that everyone should really look at their fantasy teams is, do I need this production right away? Do I need to get a player into my lineup from the waiver wire because I need that production? If the answer is no, then just stash the upside, guys. Continue to have George Pickens, continue to have Rachaad White, and let someone else get some of these other players. But yeah, look, I mean, like in a vacuum, all of these players that you're mentioning, whether it's Rex Burkhead, Curtis Samuel, or Robbie Anderson, they're all really good ads this week. I mean, they're strong waiver wire ads if you need that production. So, and if you do need that production, I'd probably rank them in this order. Maybe go Robbie over Samuel, but regardless, I think that if you're looking long term, keep George Pickens and Rachaad White.
I think I saw a comment in the chat earlier. I think it was from Scott Rainier, and he said something along the lines of, if you're looking to drop rookies after week 1, you shouldn't be drafting rookies. Do you agree with that?
Exactly. That is a great way to put it. I mean, we see rookie wide receivers do absolutely nothing all the time during the front half of their rookie season. Even guys like Elijah Moore last year. Elijah Moore didn't do anything until after their bye week. And then all of a sudden he's averaging, low-end wide receiver 1 numbers down the stretch before he gets hurt. So keep your rookie wide receivers. They perform a lot better, especially, I did some research on this, especially the guys that are ranked in the 100 to 150 range overall in redraft ADP entering the season. So they're guys that were drafted in maybe round 2 of the NFL draft, as opposed to the Drake Londons of the world who generally produce right away. Those those round 2 type wide receivers, they see such a significant increase in production during the second half of the season that you need to hold on to them. You don't drop them early on just because they weren't that involved in their offense.
Yeah, you didn't draft them to produce for you week one, so you probably shouldn't give up on them week one either. I did want to touch on Robbie Anderson a little bit here. I think some people are thinking this might be smoke, that he can't keep it up just because maybe the amount of times they've seen Robbie Anderson not do it on the NFL field. But he was one of only 2 receiving options on this team, along with DJ Moore, to have a 100% snap share. He was on the field the entire game. Are you buying into him as someone that you can start and plug in your lineup next week with Baker Mayfield?
Yeah, look, we had the same exact discussion 2 years ago. Like this exact same thing was going on with Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore 2 years ago. And it was they've had different quarterbacks the last 3 years, right? A couple years ago it was Teddy Bridgewater. Last year it was just this hodgepodge. But regardless, I mean, you've had different quarterback situation there, and quarterbacks have different tendencies. I would absolutely still rather have DJ Moore over Robbie Anderson. I think DJ Moore might even be a buy candidate right now if you want to go trade for someone. But DJ Moore's not sitting on the waiver wire. Robbie Anderson's sitting on the waiver wire. And we saw just 2 years ago on a per game basis, Robbie Anderson outpaced DJ Moore in targets and target share. So don't think that it's an impossible thing to happen. I mean, do I think that that's going to happen? No, but you have to just play probability a little bit. And if you can get him for cheap, and there's this potential that Baker Mayfield just likes to target Robbie Anderson and they have that rapport, then there's something there. And like you mentioned, he's very clearly the number 2 option in that offense.
Yeah, and I think he's going to keep that number 2 option in that offense role. Hopefully we see CMC a little bit more involved in that passing game, since Matt Rule came out and said winning teams throw the ball. Well, then throw the ball to CMC.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't have to be Robbie Anderson every time right there. We had a question from Jeremiah in here. Said, I have waiver priority 3, but I have Elijah Mitchell in an 18-man league. So this is a deep league. The waiver wire might be a little bit more sparse. Wilson is out there. I imagine someone with 1 or 2 might take Wilson. The other options are Moss and Drake. How would you be ordering these guys, prioritizing these 3 players?
I'd probably go Wilson, Drake, Moss. I think that Drake has the potential. You know, Baltimore just couldn't run the ball this past week. Their offense really didn't look good until like the tail end of that game. And so I would expect to see a better run game moving forward. Kenyon Drake saw a lot more work than I expected after signing with them like a week before last week's game happened. Zach Moss looked really good. I just worry, long term too, that James Cook will get going a little bit more than how he looked against the Rams. Devin Singletary looked really good in that game against the Rams. So I would maybe, if you need that immediate production, I think Drake is probably a little bit better than Moss. Moss is probably just a guy that you would start with an injury, and then Wilson would be my top priority in his own tier of those 3. And this is one of those examples where you would want to use your waiver priority on a guy like Jeff Wilson, because it's an 18-man league. I mean, it's an 18-team league. So, there's not going to be that much out there.
No, I agree right there. Sticking with the Ravens, we just talked a little bit about them with Kenyon Drake, but Gassan in the chat wants to know, should I keep Isaiah Likely for another week or drop? We did see some promise from him. He was out on the field quite a bit, more than I expected. Are you holding on to Isaiah Likely?
Look, I mean, I wasn't overly high on him from a redraft perspective entering the season. We generally don't see tight ends produce very well in fantasy year one. I think that he's an interesting talent, but this is a team that likely won't have a very high pass rate. And we know that the top 2 guys in Rashad Bateman and Mark Andrews have a very high likelihood of gobbling up, maybe even half of the team's targets this season. And then Devin Duvernay was involved a little bit last week. He had a 13% target share. They're peppering in some of these other wide receivers. And so from a target share standpoint, it's going to be hard for Likely to see more than 4 or 5 targets in a game this year. So if you want to drop him, I think it's okay. Depends on who you'll be picking up, how deep your league is, all that kind of stuff. So I don't want to definitively say definitely drop him. But if you're in a 10 or 12 team standard league, I would probably drop Likely.
He's exciting. It's fun to want to cheer for Isaiah Likely, especially after what we saw to the preseason. But I'm with you. There's not much hope for me this season. And you mentioned Devin Duvernay. I saw Mr. Scampers in here ask, are you dropping Mecole for Duvernay in Dynasty? Is that a move that you would make, or are you holding on to Mecole Hardman?
I'd probably hold on to Mecole Hardman. Hardman actually had the most red zone targets for Kansas City this past week. I don't think either of these guys are going to be that fantasy relevant, if I'm being honest. Duvernay, sure, he produced, but he only had a 13% target share in that offense. That's not going to cut it in that offense. If you had a 13% target share in the Patrick Mahomes offense, that might cut it. So I'm gonna stick with Mecole.
I'm with you. I'm sticking with Mecole as well. Devin Duvernay will have weeks like this. It'll be fun to cheer for him as well, but it's not going to be consistent at all. We will be back next Tuesday at 2:30 to answer your waiver wire questions, and every other week at 2:30 as well, right here on the FanDuel YouTube and Twitch. Make sure you've liked this video and subscribe to FanDuel on YouTube, or hit that follow button if you are over there on Twitch as well. JJ, this has been an absolute blast. Can't wait to do it again with you next week.
Yeah, man. Appreciate it.
Guys, you can find JJ on Twitter at Late Round QB, and check out the Late Round podcast as well. You can download it on any of your favorite podcast apps. I'm on Twitter at FYF Simon. We'll be back next week answering your questions. Until then, though, adios.